Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday, Coffee Monday. Today, you guys are going to be transitioning kind of from the biological prenatal development of individuals and start looking at the cognitive development. And you're going to be doing that through the lens of Piaget. Piaget is like a quintessential psychologist name to know. There's a lot of terms and definitions kind of within his stages and different examples of what these stages look like and how he is defining them. And as I said yesterday, there weren't a ton of videos yesterday, but there's going to be a lot today because babies are cute and little kids are cute and they do silly, funny things. So hopefully that'll brighten your Monday. With that, Piaget, cognitive development, let's go. So let's go ahead and get started. Just note, looking ahead, that you will be taking a formative after this lecture. It's going to ask you to assign what stage a certain individual is at based on a given scenario, like what stage are they in Piaget's cognitive development. So as you're learning about these different stages and what they entail, make sure you're kind of referencing it through a frame of reference that you are going to have to then apply them not only for this formative, but potentially for the FRQ as well. So keep that in mind as we move ahead. The first thing, though, that we want to do is define what is cognition. So when we talk about like cognitive development versus social development versus physical development, biological development, right? These are all different things, and they refer to different ways of growth throughout somebody's life. And when we're talking about cognition, we're talking about the mental activities that help us function. And those include what are listed here, right? This is like thinking, right? So how do we problem solve? Figuring out how the world works, developing models, language, inner thoughts, like all these ideas that pertain to thinking, right? And how our brain actually make sense of the world around us. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about cognition. So John Piaget, who, like I said, quintessential psychologist that you should know throughout the rest of your life because he's like one of the big dogs. Piaget basically said that we don't start out being able to think like adults. Instead, he studied errors in cognition made by children in order to understand in what ways they think differently than adults. So here you have two kind of examples, right? You see a little girl trying to slide down a miniature slide. Like we look at that and we're like, we wouldn't fit. But this child sees slide. I know what to do with a slide. I slide down it. But they're not able to make that connection that they are too big for the slide. The other one here, right, this little boy is trying to sit in a miniature car. Again, that spatial awareness, not being able to recognize the error in his thinking. Why can't he fit in that miniature car? Well, obviously he's too big. But again, he's like, I've seen a car like this. I rode in a car like this. I should be able to get in a car like this. So Piaget, who was alive and practicing in the early 1900s through the mid-1900s. He was trying to figure out like why were these errors in thought processing happening, and what did that tell us about our brain's development in terms of how we think over time, from infancy all the way into adulthood. With that said, Piaget would argue that this development happens in stages, specifically 4 stages. But before we dig into those 4 specific stages, we have a couple of definitions that we want to talk about that don't really necessarily like directly fit under any of the stages. They're just kind of big picture ideas that came out of Piaget's studies. So the first one here is a schema. This is basically a mental container we build to hold our experiences, right? They can take form of images, models, and or concepts. We're going to talk about the difference between models, concepts, prototypes, and stuff if you take AP Psych next year. But for now, schemas are really this idea that little kids see like a large animal with 4 legs, and mom and dad say, yeah, that's a cow. And then they go out and they have this schema, right, this mental container that we're trying to organize the world through, right? And we say all big animals with 4 legs are cows, right? Whereas that's not necessarily the case. It could be a moose, it could be a horse, it could be a bear. I don't know, right? Like, so little kids oftentimes like group and organize their ideas based on these schemas, right? And from that, we get a couple of different errors that a child could make. You could assimilate or you could accommodate, right? Assimilation refers to the incorporating new experiences into our existing schemas, and accommodation refers to adjusting our schema to better fit our experience. So in this image right down here, right, the little girl is looking at a book and she sees a dog. If a cat came up, she might assimilate that four-legged small creature to be a dog too, and she might point at the cat and say doggy, right? That would be assimilating into her currently existing schema of what a doggy is, right? On the flip side, mom and dad might say, no, this is a kitty. That's a doggy, this is a kitty. And she may accommodate and adjust her schema, right, to say that cats are furry and have long tails and dogs go woof and have long snouts, right? Like she is going to accommodate and adjust her schema to better fit her experience to be able to say, that's a kitty, that's a doggy, right? So we have within our understanding of schema, right, we have this idea of assimilate or accommodate. One way to remember that, right, assimilate, SS, same schema, right? I see a dog and then I see a cat and I call them both dog, right? I'm putting them into the same schema. I'm assimilating. Accommodating is changing or creating. CC, change or create a new schema. So this is another example, very similar to the last one, right? Boy has learned the schema of a cat, right? Then he sees a lion cub and he calls it a cat, right? That would be assimilation, right? I'm putting these both into the same schema. They both look similar. They're both cats, right? But his sister then says, no, it's a tiger cub, right? And so now he's like, oh, tiger cub. And he's able to accommodate, create a new schema and say kitty versus cub, right? So assimilate versus accommodate. So then when we're kind of trying to fit Piaget, now that we have those basic definitions, while we're trying to fit Piaget into this greater understanding of psychological debates that exist, right? We talked about nature versus nurture. Piaget would say that both nature and nurture are extremely influential on a child's development. On the issue of continuity versus stages, right, he argues stages, right? I mentioned there are 4 separate stages that we are going to be looking at as they pertain to Piaget's theory on cognitive development. He says that from looking at this kind of chart, right, from birth to nearly 2 ages, a child is in sensory motor stage, right? We're going to talk about object permanency, stranger anxiety, right? But we're experiencing the world through our senses. That's from birth to 2 years, right? And then we start to learn a couple of things and we switch at about 2 years into this pre-operational stage. And that brings us through like kindergarten, first grade, right? 6 or 7. This is when we're starting to represent things with words and images, and we use our intuition rather than logical reasoning. And we'll talk again more in detail about what that looks like, right? And how they actually differ between sensory motor and pre-operational. And we're going to look at these developmental phenomena that Piaget has identified, but I'm just giving you kind of an overview right here. We'll revisit this page at the end, this like graphic at the end, so that you can kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Consolidate all of your understanding, right? We can look at each of these stages individually, look at the specifics that relate to these individual stages, look at examples, and then at the end again, coming back to kind of fit all the pieces together and understand kind of this approach as a whole. But with that, just continuing on here, from 7 to 11, you have concrete operational. This is thinking logically about concrete events. Kids can start doing like basic math. And this is, again, kind of that next step. We have like sensory motor. Kids are like touching things, figuring out like their senses. Pre-operational, they start to like form words and better understand like logical, if I hit Susie, I will go in timeout, right? Like the basic logical consequences and whatnot. And then concrete operational as we're starting to really put these things into practice, right? We're in elementary school. We're starting to actually like learn how to read and write and do math, right? Until about 12, we hit formal operational. And this is where we see abstract reasoning come in, right? Abstract reasoning meaning like understanding higher order thinking, being able to kind of grapple with something like death or like moral judgment and like understanding the ramifications of our behaviors and how they influence other people, right? Again, we're going to talk about each of these stages individually, give examples, but I did just want you to have kind of a basic foundation as we move ahead here. Alrighty, so our birth stage is the sensory motor stage. It's from birth to age 2. And in this stage, children explore by looking, hearing, touching, mouthing, and grasping, right? Sensory motor. Think about like kids really determining or like learning about and kind of exploring their senses, right? Little kids really like to play with like those cardboard books that have like the bunny rabbit's tail is all soft and fluffy. The snake's scales are rough and shiny, right? Like little kids really like that because they're just figuring out that different things feel different and taste different and hear different, listen different, right? Wait, that didn't make sense either. Sound different. You get what I'm saying. And when I say Piaget thought that kids that are in the sensory motor stage, they didn't think abstractly. But when we like, obviously like Piaget is an older psychologist. A lot of his ideas still hold true, especially a lot of like the specific application definitions like object permanence, which we're going to look at here in just a second. But there are things that have kind of overturned some of his thought processes. Like I said, he thought that these children couldn't think abstractly, but there's evidence to say that kids can notice violations in physics, right? Such as gravity. If they've done like studies in which they put like a ball on a fish line and they drop it and it stops dropping. It like floats in the air, and little kids in the sensory motor stage can like see that and they know that that's wrong. And so is that abstract thought? Like that's the question here. And that's where the conflict may arise between like more modern psychologists and Piaget. But overall, most people agree, well actually everybody agrees, it's been scientifically proven, done a lot of tests, you could do it if you have like a little sibling or a cousin or a niece or a nephew, right? You could do this with kids and test their object permanence or their understanding of object permanence. We know that through games like Peekaboo, kids can learn object permanence, this idea that like when the objects are like hidden, they don't disappear, right? Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist anymore. And they start to learn this idea at 6 to 8 months. So we're going to watch a video that shows this phenomenon, and it's more they're covering something up. There's a ball, and they cover it with a blanket. And the kids lose interest because they think the ball disappeared, right? Because they don't understand that covering something up doesn't make it disappear or like not be in existence anymore. Instead, it's still there underneath the blanket, okay? So we're going to watch that just so you guys have a quick example of object permanence and what this sensory motor stage is in fact like.
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder Peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
At Maya's age, babies know to look for the object, but they might not have everything else straight. 10-month-old Simon is about to make a classic mistake, known as the A not B error. Although he watched us place the toy plane under the white cloth, he'll look for it where he last found it, not where he watched us hide it. If a 1-year-old can't find an object they want right away, they're likely to give up looking.
So that
was the real object permanence. Here is a funny video. It's just a funny video. Object permanence, part 2.
A new report from the National Center for Education shows that an alarming 10% of U.S. high school students graduate without basic object permanence skills. According to the study, a growing number of American seniors are lagging behind their international counterparts when it comes to the crucial knowledge that things don't just disappear if you're not looking at them.
Because it exists even if your eyes can't see it. Am I making sense?
No.
U.S. high schoolers have dropped to 17th in science, 25th in math, and a troubling 180th place in the basic cognitive awareness most humans develop as toddlers. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan is asking Congress to fund increased after-school disguise and reveal programs.
I'm still here, right? By the time they get to high school, it's too late. You have to identify the problem between 15 months and 18 months. It's time to get the kids excited to learn the most obvious mental concepts that make us capable of functioning.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to do better. It's just I don't know how I'm supposed to learn anything if I don't even have a teacher.
I'm still here, Vanessa.
Oh, God damn it.
Some educators worry that too much focus placed on object permanence might take away from other important skills, such as not touching hot things that could burn you. Next up, Quentin Tarantino responds to accusations of racism, saying, quote, "Some of my best movies have black people."
That second video, so dumb. The Onion, I don't know if you guys know of The Onion, hopefully you do, but it's like a fake news source that does like parody news, and that's like, I don't know. This video I remember from my like high school psychology class, and that's like how I remember object permanence from this dumb video. Anyway, looking at the pre-operational stage then, this is like up through like kindergarten, right? That's 6 to 7 years old. And kids are beginning to represent their schema and even some feelings with words and images. They're using visual models, doing pretend play. Like think about little kids playing house and putting their dollies to sleep because maybe they saw daddy put their little sister to sleep or something, and they're engaging in this pretend play. They are beginning to picture other points of view, replacing egocentrism with theory of mind, which we'll talk about here on the next slide. And they're starting to use intuition, but not logic and abstraction yet, right? Like their intuition is based on experience, right? If I hit my brother, I'm going to get in a timeout. Therefore, I shouldn't hit my brother again because I don't want to get in timeout. So they're using that intuition, and they're kind of piecing together their own little person experience to inform their behaviors and the way that they're thinking here moving forward. So like I said, there's a couple of terms in that last slide that we're going to go into a little bit more detail on. The first one is egocentrism. As little kids are growing up and through this pre-operational stage, they begin to shift from this idea of egocentrism, I am the world, to starting to be able to understand different perspectives, right? So egocentrism is being unable to see another person's perspective or even to imagine that the other people have a perspective that might be different from your own. So with that, we're going to watch this quick video. It shows 2 little boys at different stages looking at like a model. The younger boy is unable to like understand that the person sitting across the table from them may see something different than he sees, because again, that egocentrism, whereas the older boy is able to say like, I know what you're seeing is different from what I'm seeing because we are different people, we have different perspectives. So we're going to watch that and then talk about self-concept and step on to the next stage.
Can you tell me what you see when you look at that from where you're sitting? What are some of the things that you see?
And a cat.
A cat.
And a tree and a bone.
Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. Can you tell me what you see when you look at it from that stool?
An owl.
An owl?
And him.
What is that?
A goat.
A goat?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you see?
Yeah, right there.
Right there, what is that?
A tree.
A tree.
And that's another little tree.
Another little tree?
Yeah, right.
Okay. And can you tell me what I see when I look at this from where I'm sitting right here? Mm-hmm.
And a little tree, and that, and that.
Okay, so can you tell me what you see from that side?
A fox and a bone, and a volcano, and
Yeah.
a rock, and a big fat Christmas tree.
Now, Braxton, can you tell me what I see from where I'm sitting?
A bird, and a river, and a volcano, and a horsey, and a rock, and a plant.
So there was your psychological study of egocentrism. Here's a bunch of cute kids playing hide and seek, thinking that just because I can't see you, you can't see me. Egocentrism in a cute way.
No, seat behind here. One, two, three. Here it comes. Ah, Dad! Five, six, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Ready or not, here I come.
I think we found Nathan. Hi Nathan, we found you.
Ready or not, here I come. Where are you? I'm gonna find you. Where are you? Where are you hiding? Oh,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I can't see it.
oh. Where could Sophia be? I think you need to close it all the way. You're gonna hide. Come out now, Scarlett, you've won. Out you come.
That second video gets me every time. These little kids are so funny. They're like standing up against a wall, like, ooh, if you can't see me, or if I can't see you, you can't see me. They're so silly. Oh, I love that video. Okay. Also within this pre-operational stage, kids begin to develop a self-concept, which is a sense of one's identity and personal worth. This could be like connected to their gender, group membership, traits, skills, like are they a brother, are they a sister, are they a son, are they a daughter, are they a friend, are they a student, right? Like who are they, and what does that mean for their interaction with the world, right? This is something that develops gradually and has kind of been like added on to Piaget's stages over time. We know it develops usually by 15 to 18 months, and children will begin to recognize themselves in the mirror. By 8 to 10 years, children's self-images are pretty stable. And that's why they've done so much research on like the impact that social media and like advertising might have on young children growing up. Because once they kind of have this self-concept of who they are, whether it's positive or negative, it's very difficult to change as they continue on into their future lives. It's doable, especially with like help from teachers and psychologists and other adults. But self-identity is pretty stable once they hit 8 to 10 years of life. So we're gonna watch a quick video that looks like self-concept. We're going to chat about theory of mind, as I referenced, look at conservation, and then we'll shift to concrete operational, that next stage in Piaget's theory.
Who's that in the mirror? This is known as a mirror self-recognition test, which may offer clues about the development of self-awareness. Without alerting the child, a mark is placed on its forehead.
Where's the baby? Where's the baby?
Usually, a baby younger than about 18 months doesn't make the connection between itself and the person in the mirror. The child may even look behind the mirror for the stranger it sees.
Hi. Hi. Dad.
But by about 18 months, there's a change in the child's awareness. Now it notices the red dot and the link between itself and the image in the mirror.
It's not red anymore.
What's not red?
My this. My head.
Over the next few years, children go on to fulfill their human birthright, constructing an increasingly sophisticated sense of self. They will have a rich and complex life of the mind, and a sense of being the central characters in their own dramas.
So I mentioned theory of mind, and this kind of juxtaposes egocentrism, right? This inability to see somebody else's perspective. Theory of mind refers to the ability to understand that others have their own thoughts and perspectives. So here's like an example that they would do with a young child, right? They would do a research study and they would show them this chain of events, and you can tell younger children can't determine where the ball is, whereas older children can, and that's because they have this theory of mind, right? This is Sally. Sally puts her ball in the red cupboard. Sally goes away and moves the ball to the blue cupboard. Where will Sally look for the ball, right? Little kids will say she'll look for it in the red cupboard because that's where she put it, and they don't connect the dots that Anne moved the ball, and even though Sally doesn't know where it is, like she should still look where she put it, right? Whereas older kids are like, well, obviously the ball's in the blue box because Anne moved it there. Right, so theory of mind is that ability to understand others have their own thoughts and perspective, and like even though I put the ball in the red cupboard, it may not be there because there are other people in this world that can impact where that ball is. The last kind of example and definition of this pre-operational stage is conservation, right? And conservation is the ability to understand that a quantity is conserved or does not change even when it is arranged in a different shape. So you can see this example here is with liquid, right? They put milk in cups that are the same size. There's the same amount of milk, and kids can say, yes, there's the same amount of milk. When they put the same amount of milk into a tall, skinny glass, because it looks taller, right? Kids at this stage will say that the taller glass has more milk because it looks taller, it looks like there's more. They can't grasp the idea that there is the same amount of milk, just a different sized container, right? The video that we're gonna watch shows a different kind of example, not specific to fluidity, but more about like amount of candy. So this will give you one more kind of concrete example of conservation, and that'll be kind of the terms that you need to know for this stage, the pre-operational stage of Piaget's cognitive development.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay, you ready? Yeah. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're both the same.
They're the same?
5.
Okay. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah, it's more far away than that. Looks like bigger.
All right, we're going to play a game with the graham crackers, and we're going to share them between me and you, okay? Okay. Do you think that we shared those fairly?
No.
No, why not?
You have those and I have this one.
Well, what if we try this? Okay, can I put this down right there?
Okay.
Now is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is it fair now?
Because we both have 2.
So then moving into our last 2 stages, they're pretty straightforward. The sensory motor and the pre-operational are going to have the most content and definitions tied to them. Concrete operational is really from your through your elementary school years. They're starting to grasp conservation, right? This idea that if you pour the same amount of a fluid into a different container, it doesn't change the amount of the fluid, right? It's just that idea of displacement. They can also start to grapple with concrete transformations and simple mathematical ideas. So 3 + 7 = 10, and understanding that because of that, we also know that 10 - 7 = 3, right? These kind of basic ideas are what define the concrete operational stage, right? Just as toddlers enjoy practicing their newfound understanding of object permanence by playing peekaboo, kids in the concrete operational stage might like playing around with their understanding of conservation with jokes like the one in the book, right? You guys aren't reading the textbook, but there's a good kind of reference point. They say, don't cut the pizza into 8 pieces. I can only eat 6, right? That idea that it doesn't matter if you have 6 or 8 pieces, it's still a whole pizza. So just kind of keep in mind this transition, right? This is the 3rd stage, and everything after this is basically looking at the ability to engage in abstract thought. And that's going to be your formal operational stage. So this is from about 11 on. We know concrete operations. This can include arithmetic transformations. We also know about formal operations that pertain to allegorical thinking. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, understanding that this comment is one of hypocrisy, right? This also includes algebra, right? All of the kind of higher order thinking skills that you start to develop throughout middle school into high school and adulthood, right? That's going to be your formal operational stage. So as I said, we would revisit that graphic here at the end, looking at the 4 stages, right? Sensory motor, experiencing the world for the first time. What do things taste like, smell like, sound like, feel like, right? That's sensory motor. Then pre-operational is kind of starting to assign words and understandings to these explorations and adventures. And then we move into concrete operational, starting basic mathematics, and then throughout after you're 12 until adulthood, right, then you're having that formal operational or abstract thinking. So those are the stages of Piaget's cognitive development. Again, you are going to do a formative that is going to ask you to apply these different stages to certain situations or scenarios that are referenced. We're going to look at one last thing, and that's Vygotsky's alternative to Piaget. And really this is just as I referenced before, is Piaget is a little bit old school. It's pretty common knowledge now that there are stages that you can reference, but it is a pretty fluid process in regards of a kid just doesn't wake up one day when he hits 7 years old and is able to do math, right? It's a process. and it takes time and it is different for every kid. And so Lev Vygotsky is another psychologist who proposed an alternative to Piaget, and he focused on how kids learn in the context of social communications, right? It's not just about like their ability to perceive the world, but how they like interact with others, right? The principle here is that children learn thinking skills by internalizing language from others and developing inner speech, right? Put the big blocks on the bottom, not the top. Somebody said that, therefore I'm going to remember. That's how you build a strong pyramid structure out of blocks, whatever, right? So as opposed to Piaget, Vygotsky saw development as building on a scaffold of mentoring, language, and cognitive support from parents and others. We don't just like naturally develop these understandings of things like object permanence or overcome egocentrism, right? Like they're taught to us by others, and we learn about them through our social engagement. So Vygotsky agrees that some of these kind of like milestones exist, but he wouldn't say that they are contained to individual stages throughout a child's life. Again, his name is Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky is how you say it. And so, again, he is kind of somebody that you might hear in association with Piaget's cognitive development. So that's kind of all I've got for you. We're going to watch one last YouTube video of Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development. It's about 5 minutes long. It just goes into further detail on some of the terminology and the definitions that are tied to his theory of cognitive development. And then you're going to, like I said a couple of times, hop on Canvas and do that formative. All right, so this hopefully will bring it all together. And then tomorrow we're going to talk social development.
Vygotsky's theory of social development argues that community and language play a central part in learning, while Jean Piaget concluded that children's cognitive development happens in stages. Vygotsky rejected his ideas and believed that children develop independently of specific stages as the result of social interactions. Vygotsky claimed that we are born with 4 elementary mental functions: attention, sensation, perception, and memory. It is our social and cultural environment that allows us to use these elementary skills to develop and finally gain higher mental functions. This development ideally happens in the zone of proximal development. First, there is what we can do on our own. Then, there is the zone of proximal development, which represents what we can do with the help of an adult, a friend, technology, or what Vygotsky called the more knowledgeable other. Last, there is what's beyond our reach. To illustrate this, let us think of twins who were raised in a community in which boys are expected to learn and succeed, while girls are only expected to be pretty. At the age of 10 months, both have the ability to crawl and are in the zone of proximal development for learning how to stand on their feet. The more knowledgeable other, in this case the father, provides the boy with opportunities to practice in a playroom that he has equipped with scaffolding and other objects. The boy is encouraged to explore the equipment, and eventually he uses it to pull himself up. A few hours later, he's cruising along the structures, and a few days later, he's standing on his feet. The girl also has the potential to stand, but does not receive any support in learning the skill. When we compare the two, we see that while the girl is still trying to get up, the boy has moved into a new zone. He knows how to balance while standing, and now has the potential to learn how to walk. Both will eventually learn how to walk, but according to Vygotsky, the boy will be more skilled. The same principles apply to all learning and the development of higher cognitive functions, and only those learning with the assistance of a capable mentor can reach the full potential of their ability. Vygotsky therefore believed that inside the zone of proximal development, learning can precede development, which means that a child is able to learn skills that go beyond their natural maturity. He also established an explicit connection between speech and mental concepts, arguing that inner speech develops from external speech via a gradual process of internalization. This means that thought itself develops as a result of conversation. Therefore, younger children who don't finish this process can only think out loud. Once the process is complete, inner speech and spoken language become independent. Lev Vygotsky died of tuberculosis in 1934 at the age of 37. Despite his young age, he became one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He left the following advice for educators. By giving students practice in talking with others, we give them frames for thinking on their own. What do you think? Can a child learn anything regardless of any developmental prerequisites? And do we learn only through social and cultural contexts? And if so, do you think it is appropriate for a more knowledgeable other to determine what a child should learn next?
There you have it, Piaget, his cognitive stages of development. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but you do have a formative to complete that's going to ask you to apply these different stages to specific scenarios. So hop on Canvas, make sure you complete the formative check. Tomorrow you're going to be looking at just a brief intro to social development, and then you're going to be watching an episode of Babies, the Netflix series. So look forward to that. Happy Monday!